So when is your house going up for sale, you think?
Oh, I'm still in the cleaning and picking up concrete and cutting back trees and clipping and
Right. I know the feeling. It took us 6 months to prepare our house for sale.
wow, did you enjoy it too?
Did I enjoy it? No, I hated it.
Yeah.
No, don't like working on houses. I did too much of that previous. We built a house, my ex-wife and I built a house that was at lock-up stage. It was livable. And then we spent quite a while finishing off that house. I must say, I did enjoy the end product, like you'd finish tiling the bathroom or creating a new wall. I was, and you sit back and I enjoyed that. But while I'm doing it, I don't like it.
Yeah, it's a lot to be thinking about.
Are you enjoying it? Are you?
There are lots of little things that are, bring back memories. Like I found a wrapper from, I was like, oh yeah, we used to get those red and green Hershey Kisses over Christmas. So for me, it floods back memories.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Garrett, this recording is going to stay entirely private. You're not going to be broadcasting it anywhere, are you?
No, we actually do post all of our recordings on YouTube. So that not a joke. We do that because a lot of people ask us to do that when they can't make the meeting. They want to be able to see a recording. So we do
Right.
put them up on YouTube.
Now, is that just the presentation part or all the discussion part as
The
well?
discussion as well.
Right. Okay. I
Yeah.
better watch what I say then.
Yeah. Don't say anything too agitating. But our one rule is to be polite. So I'm sure
It's not that it's
Yeah.
not that worries me. It's people can take one sentence and
Right.
take it out of context and say, Les, you said this, when they
Right.
haven't fully understood what I was saying.
Right.
And that's what happens in private conversation, in these kinds of conversations.
Yeah,
I'm on
unfortunately,
something. I don't know what I'm on.
there are people who do that, but hopefully like nobody pays too much attention to people who take stuff completely out of context. But unfortunately, we live in a world where fake news travels faster than real news. So I know I'm being optimistic, but ultimately we've kind of made the call that it's better to share the wisdom that we learn in these events with everybody, and so we do that. And so actually the reason we're having Remco present again is we actually did not get a recording the last time he presented, so we're doing it again specifically so that we can get a recording of Remco's great presentation on postmodernism. And Remco, I'm going to make you a co-host.
Good evening, Garrett.
Good morning.
Oh, you got the time phone. Yeah, okay. You've got the you've made me you've enabled my screen sharing.
Yes.
Have you? Okay,
yes.
Fantastic.
You're a co-host now, so you have screen sharing capability.
Right. Okay. I'm looking forward to a bit of fun this evening. And some good questions. And again, Garrett, hey, listen, you're doing an awesome work with your Freethinker Institute. I know I said it before, but look, just to give the tree a bit of a rattling, and not everybody will agree with what I'm about to present, but what it will do is will make things visible.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we appreciate your coming to present tonight. So you do the subject a much better justice than I would do. So I'm glad that you're the one presenting on it.
Well, I had some fabulous feedback, far more than I had anticipated. I mean, at one time there was a fellow at an Ottawa meetup, and he said he spent a lifetime studying philosophy, never understood postmodernism until he attended the Melbourne one. So I felt quite flattered with that. And I was a presenter there. Anyway, you might have heard it.
Where I was coming from and gave me a second chance. And I want to be that person for other people too.
Just for everyone to know, you come in off mute, so please mute yourself if you're not talking. And we're going to start with social. So if people want to introduce themselves and say where you're connecting from and what interests you in postmodernism. We would love to hear from everybody, and you can raise your hand if there are already hands up, and otherwise feel free to just speak up. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm Peter. I'm coming in from the Washington, D.C. area, which is, I think, where the group is mainly situated. I could be mistaken. So I was a philosophy student myself. I hadn't thought much about postmodernism. I mean, I had usually for many years had associated it more with the domains of film and architecture, and as more of an aesthetic movement. But I sort of came to appreciate. Well, I'm not exact. I mean, I find postmodernism interesting from an intellectual level, but I find it horrifying from a practical level, because I find it very. But that's sort of what interests me about it, is this whole sort of notion that the truth is sort of relative. I mean, I don't want to cite. I don't want to stir up too much of any political information here, but there was a particular news incident back from 2017. We'll just say, when somebody said something to the effect of, "Well, those aren't lies; they're alternative facts." Now, whatever we may think politically, that is itself sort of a manifestation, at least in some sense, of the idea of postmodernism. And it interests me because we are sort of the modern, at least in the past 10 to 15 years, has sort of moved in the direction of the truth is secondary to uh, what is what is considered favorable, or the truth is what we say it is, that kind of thing. So that's what intrigued me about postmodernism. Of course, um, I could sort of have it sort of incorrect, but I mean, I had recently written an article on postmodernism, and it was sort of getting at that point of like, this can become a dangerous thing if it's at some point the bridges will collapse if we're not careful. So yeah, that was my interest in postmodernism.
Well, the truth is, if the bridge collapsed, then that's the bridge didn't really collapse, because that's my opinion. Oh wait.
Yeah, there you go.
And as long as the news posts it, then it's okay, right? So that
Yeah.
the bridge didn't collapse even if people died. No, I'm just teasing. So
Yeah.
sorry, black humor. Peter, I get where you're coming from, and I think it'll be interesting to hear Remco present this topic, because what you said resonated a lot with me. That said, we do advertise this group to a place in your one meetup in your area, but we advertise to a bunch of meetups globally, so we have a pretty diverse, wide-ranging audience. So that
Cool.
said, Ayala, am I pronouncing that right? I always forget.
Yes, you do. You
Okay.
do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gerd. What you said, Peter, is probably the reason that postmodernism became so stigmatized and so threatening to a lot of people, and not because it is not realistic, and it's hard to argue against it, but because it just shakes up our need for solid grounds, for one thing that would be whatever we call the truth, even though nobody yet was able to define the word truth or to grab it. But even they're talking about the emotional level here. There is, of course, this the bridge example, and the threat of everything goes and everything is there is nothing to grab. But there are also a lot of advantages in this point of view, which will allow, in my opinion, more tolerance, more diversity, and maybe will lessen the sense of certainty that we tend sometimes to grab on when we have an opinion, which really is an obstacle at trying to listen and understand each other. So we have also we want to look at it also from that point of view. That's all for now. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Remco.
Thanks, Ayala. Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'm interested in it because I hear various interpretations of what it is. None of them flattering, some of them threatening. And I'm wondering if there were alternative truths and that becomes incorporated in our justice system. What does that mean? It'll come down like a house of cards? Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And now nobody knows what truth means. So the future becomes show trials with evidence that is popular versus that's admissible, and evidence that's unpopular is inadmissible. And that's how decisions would be made. The most popular truth rules. Is that what postmodernism means? Just something to think about. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Derek. Josh, go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I write in philosophy, and most of the stuff that I'm interested in it would be considered loosely within the category of postmodernism. Heidegger, Derrida, Foucault, Deleuze, all the big names, all the despised names. If you go onto YouTube and you want to, hear Jordan Peterson go on about all the horrors of postmodernism. Also, those who work in the philosophy of science, including those who work in science, but you're not going to find an awful lot of postmodernists within physics, but increasingly you will within the social sciences, like psychology. You'll find some fascinating contributions to very concrete questions within psychology, such as understanding autism, empathy, schizophrenia, and theories of empathy that identify loosely with a postmodern perspective. They're very much on about truth, and they will tell you that modernism isn't about alternative truths. It isn't about truth as popularity contest, which is just as much associated with modern notions of truth, by the way. That's how communities within science ultimately decide. I mean, it is a popularity contest in a certain sense, but that doesn't take away from the rigor of truth. But what they would argue is that they're not tampering with the notion of truth or traditional notions that we think of in relation to the precision of a science like physics. It's not a question of disavowing it or invalidating it so much as digging beneath it to look at the plumbing that holds it up, saying, look, first of all, there is plumbing there. With underneath the theories, there are paradigms, and underneath the paradigms are presuppositions, even metaphysical presuppositions, and just pointing out that yes, that the facts are based on interpretation. Interpretations are based on larger frameworks. Those frameworks, when they change, they don't change in a rational manner. They change it's neither rational nor irrational, but the way they change is very different than one thinks of when one is looking at the notion of truth just in terms of, in a propositional way, as something is either the case or not the case. It's a strange notion for a lot of people to ask not whether something is the case or isn't the case, but what it means to change the sense of something being the case or not the case, right? So it's a kind of it's a postmodernism points to this underlying plumbing, which people tend not to realize is there, we take for granted on the surface that facts are just what is the case, and they line themselves up, on one side or another, so that they can blame the other side for not seeing what is the case. Anyway, I'll shut up now.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Garrett has just asked me to moderate for a couple of minutes while he's gone out. But yeah, you raised some good points, and also in particular, some of the others. I took particular note of Derek's comments and his reservations, and look, I can certainly sympathise, and I'm hoping that at the end of the presentation you'll have a little bit of well, you won't necessarily agree, but at least see reasons for my own enthusiasm for it. Anyway, Josh, thank you for that. Is there anybody else while we're waiting for Garrett? Garrett is back. Good. Okay, Garrett, over to you.
Let's let Kyrie introduce themselves, and then Joe, and then Remco, we can have you get started with the presentation after that. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Kyrie? Kiri? You're on mute. Let me request to unmute.
All right. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Can't seem to, sometimes I can't pull it up. I'm on my phone and I lose some of the functionality a little bit. But yeah, interested in this topic. Kind of come to a few of these. It's been a while. Life has had its ups and downs on my end, and recently lost my mother. So I'm not exactly sure in what framework we'll be talking about truth. Like the last person said, when you get kind of into the weeds and the psychological and sociological and philosophical and metaphysical, I can definitely see where postmodernism can come in. I am more of a Peterson person, because I am, the stuff he mentioned is not a part of my life. I'm not a researcher. I don't have my doctorate in, social political theory. A lot of people we deal with reality. So I can definitely understand where he's coming from. I'm just wondering where the renewed interest in it, especially from academia, is going to take us. How far is it going to go, as in 1 + 1 = 10, and how we're applying this. Like, are we applying this to every aspect of our life? Is a rock actually a rock? I can definitely see room for all these kinds of debates, especially at the more higher elites level. I personally fear that there can be too much delving into, that kind of academic, like banter and having fun, of course. But then when I see certain things applied in real life, it's not the same. And when you deal with people who are not on that level, or they're more so laymen, that kind of pushes, pushing their perspective of reality, especially if we are going to talk modern day post-COVID reality, when many people are suffering from anxiety and depression, not knowing what reality is. I think it would definitely be very interesting to see how all of that plays out. All right, that was me.
Great, thanks, and welcome back. Glad to have you back. And I apologize if I pronounced your name wrong. Hopefully I was close.
You were.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out how to mute please mute me again. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble.
Yeah, no problem. And then Joe, if you want to do an introduction, and then I'll kind of kick things off. Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Joe. I'm from right outside of Philadelphia, and thank you for having me back, Garrett. And I'm excited to hear Remco this evening. There's a lot that we have already discussed regarding postmodernism. I'm understanding it more, but I still don't understand what the constructive alternatives are to deconstructing everything. So I think that's really where how this becomes actionable in the world. I can see where utilitarian, the virtue, all these other, systems of belief, they have ways of acting in the world. I'm not exactly sure how the postmodernists but plan to take action to actually make effective change.
Cool. That's a good question for Remco when we get there. I'm going to kind of kick things off, Remco, and just kind of introduce the FTI and mention that tonight's event, I guess I'll introduce myself really quickly. My name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor, and I'm the executive director of the Freethinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's event. We're thankful to have Remco as our speaker, and I'll say a little bit about the FTI first, and then I'll let Remco introduce himself. We're basically, the FTI is a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We want to help people be the best versions of themselves, to seek truth and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday evening, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. And we have weekly members events where you apply for membership, and if you become a member, you can join those members events. And we try to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. We help kind of create a peer friend group that's kind of a coaching, mentoring peer group. And we have only one rule in the FTI, and I'll ask everyone to follow it tonight, which is to remain polite. That kind of keeps us all in the rational part of our brain. And so would appreciate if everyone can remain polite, even though this can be sometimes a topic that can be, a little bit, of a hot button topic. I think keeping polite will help us think about it rationally, and that'll help us come to the most solid conclusions we can. So that said, I want to introduce Remco, and Remco is going to be the presenter tonight. I want to thank him for coming back. Unfortunately, the last time he presented, I was away from my desk and did not catch the recording. And so Remco was kind enough to present again tonight and on postmodernism. So I appreciate that. And so thank you, Remco, for coming back and sharing a perspective on postmodernism for all of us that are still trying to learn about it and understand, as a lot of the questions here were questions that I have too. So I'm looking forward to hearing you kind of cover those, whether in your presentation or in the Q&A portion. I will tell everyone that we're going to hold questions until the end of Remco's presentation. By popular opinion, we want to let people sort of hear the presenter's perspective first, and then we can ask questions. Just jot a note down for any questions you have, and then once the presentation is done, we'll take all the questions in the order that people raise their hands afterwards. So with that said, Remco, thank you so much, and I'll let you introduce yourself and the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. And look, hi everyone. And my name is Remco. I live in Australia, in Perth, if you must know. I used to be a chemical engineer, quite objective and rational. And particularly after my retirement, early retirement as I took it, I became quite interested in philosophy. And I became interested in philosophy not for any of the facts, but for seeing the bars that I had created as an obstacle to seeing the reality, the world, seeing alternative views, and to be free of them. So I've prepared a presentation which I'd like to share. I have presented it previously quite a few times. I would welcome any questions and comments at the end, as Garrett said. I won't be monitoring the meeting chat, so forgive if you make any comments directly at me. Forgive me, but I'm going to be focused on the slides, and besides, the slides will cover the chat anyway. An important point I want to make is this: some of you may think this is a philosophy talk, and dismiss it as such, particularly as it is a very confronting point of view. I would be very sad if you took that attitude, because I'm not interested in learning philosophy per se. Philosophy is to me a form of therapy, and I call it therapy. It crystallizes a lot of things that we take for granted. It challenges, and I personally have found it extremely liberating, extremely enabling me to have alternative ways of thinking. So that's enough said. I will begin the slide. I've trimmed the slides down. I'm hoping to meet Garrett's timeline. So with that, without further ado, let me share the screen and get started. Let's see. Here we go. Why did that pop up? Are you seeing the screen?
We see the motorcycle.
You're
and the
seeing a
sunset.
motorcycle. That's not the screen you meant to see. I've actually clicked. This is sort. This occasionally happens. It's asking me to sign in. No, what is going on here? Why is this? Oh.
Also told the federal investigators that Trump was being dishonest with the public when he first.
I think he'll be back in just 1 minute. I think he signed out by accident.
Before final results were even in. Obviously, we didn't win, a source quoted Meadows as telling Smith's team.
Right. I'm back.
Welcome back.
I'm back. I had to do this. I couldn't see any other way out. I don't know why this happened. Anyway, let's share the screen. You have to enable screen sharing for me, Garrett.
Oh, you should. Let me make you a co-host again. There you go.
All right. Share screen. Select the screen. Okay. You should see a motorbike. Oh, now I've got that screen again. Why did that happen? I've got a screen here which says join a meeting, sign up, sign in. This happened last time.
When you click share screen, it'll have desktop 1, desktop 2, and desktop 3.
Yeah. All right. Look, you're seeing that motorbike screen that
Yep.
you now know
Yes.
my motor's up. Right. Let's stay with that. I'll ignore that. And let's get started before otherwise we're going to get some frustrated people here. Okay. And right. Now, you should be seeing a chessboard.
Yep.
Now, I just slipped this chessboard in because it is my motivation. Now, just a minute. Why am I not seeing? Let me just see. Right. Okay, so that's the topic. Chessboard. Chessboard is flat. A chessboard is black and white. And I find most of the the predominant conversation is very binary. It's very black and white. And that is what motivated this particular slide. I would like to encourage an attitude of looking at the ambiguity, be comfortable in the grayness, and in particular to see the other side. And that's why I slipped this slide in before my main slide. Okay, there it is, the words. Sorry, a bit of a rough start. What I'm going to cover this evening is the pendulum in philosophy. Again, please don't look at it as a philosophy lesson. Look at it as a summation of attitude, a pendulum. You'll understand a bit later. What philosophy is and how it connects and relates to society. Wittgenstein, he's an abomination of a philosopher to many traditional philosophers. He's not particularly well liked in the English-speaking world. He is an iconoclast. He was seen by Bertrand Russell as a genius, and at the end, he called him a mystic. I will talk more about Wittgenstein. He's a profound philosopher. The problem with Wittgenstein is that his legacy is seen as a negative. I'll make that clearer later. Postmodernists, with their thinking, I tend to have an adversity to absolutes. they see things in a more relative, whether it be subjective reality or it's not. They resist final stories, and of course, what science is and how it relates to language. Language is a key component of postmodernism, as you will hopefully get. Okay, now the beginning. You know, it was about 2,500 years ago, before philosophy took root in the Western world, and they were with the ancient Greeks. And around about 500 BC, something started to happen. It took the world from a world that was undivided, as you're seeing here, as a representation of things were, and they began to question. And in the process of questioning, something began to happen. So we'll start with Socrates. And Socrates had an attitude of subjectivity. In here, in other words, putting it back to the individual to look at themselves, and very much into the relativism. And we'll explain that a little bit later. And I've used a symbol for that on the right there is the kaleidoscope. And then shortly afterwards, these philosophers emerged. That was Plato, and I have Aristotle. Now Aristotle is a little bit right of left. The word left is not to be taken literally. In other words, a little bit towards the center. But I'm going to. The point is here, predominantly Plato. He was more objective. He was more about defining things out there, and very much into realism. And hence, I've used the symbol of the telescope as to symbolize that particular attitude. So what happened? You had an evolving attitude is about precision and logical rigor. Now that will resonate with I would suspect with the majority of you. Now, Socrates might have said this in response: "I like your logic, but it's detached from the real world experience and human existence." A little bit of fluffiness, perhaps you might say. And so what that achieved was a divide, that undivided world, the world that was populated by what Nietzsche called the noble savages, was beginning to be divided by these philosophic schools. And look, this is not meant to be a history lesson, but I have to provide context, because without context, without providing you the history and the evolution, postmodernism can't be talked about. It will be meaningless to you. I really have to go through. Bear with me. I thought long and hard about this. How will I introduce postmodernism? And I have to start here, as uncomfortable as it is for me. So there is a divided bridge between the two halves. And this man, ultimately, as I will talk about, is Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he's carrying a ladder because his reasoning was, and he said, he who understands me will discard the ladder that you have just climbed with me. Now that, again, just hold it there, I will explain. So what postmodernism is doing is, in a sense, bridging the divide. And that is actually wrong. But I left it there. I say it's wrong because they don't recognize the divide, but you could say that is what they have done. Okay, so why is there that divide? And that is the question. Why is there a divide? Remember that opening slide of the chessboard? That will also be relevant. So, the philosophy pendulum, it's a metaphorical term that I'm going to be using. And you remember the terms, the objective out there realism versus the subjective in here relativism. Now, I'm going to be putting up a lot of words. I'm going to invite you to ignore them. They're descriptions of the various expressions in philosophy and also of culture. What I'm saying to you, ignore the words, but look at where the words are placed. Look at where, what I'll do is I'll just turn my laser pointer on. Okay, that should hopefully, okay. So what you're now seeing is the description, and it's on the right. And then you had Plato on the left. Now, we're going to skip the in-between years for convenience. And you then have the early modern philosophies, scientific inclined people, and note there on the left. Then you had the Enlightenment, and you had almost a reaction. And again, I'd say, look, don't worry about the words. Look where they are on the right. We had philosophy, the modernist philosophers of Hegel and Schopenhauer, the existentialists with Kierkegaard and Nietzsche, the analytic school. That's the school that's most comfortable for most people, particularly in the English-speaking world, helped by the Vienna Circle. They were a group of philosophers that were forced out of Austria by Nazism, and many of them emigrated to the English-speaking world and helped reinforce the analytical school. And it's a very good, I mean, look, I'm not attempting to diminish the analytical mindset, but I'm just saying it is a perspective. It's a perspective we've grown up with. It's a perspective we feel most comfortable, and for some they sound very erudite in disparaging the alternative fluff side on the right here. Okay, and then we've got the continental school again on the right, and it includes people like Husserl, Heidegger, and the existentialists like Sartre and Camus and so on. And then came along the postmodernists. Now note where they are. They are in the middle. They straddle both sides. And that's the important part to get, that you cannot really place them on the left or on the right. That will, again, will make more sense. So what we've had is a pendulum that has been swinging and has been swinging for 2.5 millennia. And let's start with Newton and Descartes. They're very much, as you can see here, you can read the words for yourself. Newton, you could say, began the scientific or evolved a scientific method. He began, enough said about it, I'm not going to. And then you had a bit of a backlash, because during the Enlightenment, there were some criticisms. And so you have people like Voltaire and Rousseau. Now, I'm repeating myself. I'm just trying to make a point. And jumping ahead a little again, you had Gottlob Frege, this is a gentleman here, and Bertrand Russell, and the analytical school. And they were very intent on logic, clarification, the systematic methods in philosophy. Now, that is where I will begin. And in a few moments, you have to, and I'm repeating where I opened, you have to understand that philosophy is not a separate pursuit. Call it a language if you like, but they both shape society and society shapes them. So again, you have Newton's laws, Newton, and he introduced an empirical attitude. You had the Romantic movement as a backlash. You had Darwin's evolution, very important, because he pushed humans off the peak as a peak entity, and it challenged a general underlying attitude. Karl Marx took on many of the economic issues and made them visible. Freud, he made today be looked upon as past tense, but he introduced the importance of the psyche and how we see the world and experience the world. So the point again, it influences society, it influences science, and vice versa. For many, philosophy it should be looked upon like science. Many of the conversations sounds almost like a scientific discussion, and that is, in my view, not what philosophy should be about. It should be about questioning. So here we are. We have Gottlob Frege and Bertrand Russell, both analytic school. These two partnered, evolved a very important publication on logic. And along comes this gentleman here, And oh yeah, I'm sorry, a bit behind in my words here. Okay, so Gottlob Frege, Bertrand Russell, and Ludwig Wittgenstein. Now, I'm really enchanted by this man, and I will. But an important point to make is some salient features about this man. One, he was an Austrian. He was extremely wealthy. He was one of the wealthiest men in Europe. It's important to understand that. He was rather autistic, extremely bright. Bertrand Russell called him genius. And he remained an analytical philosopher for the whole of his career, but he turned analytical philosophy against itself. And a quick comment, Vienna Circle, I've already mentioned them, a group of philosophers who were forced into a diaspora following Nazism. One of them was actually shot, killed, and they emigrated to Britain and the United States in particular. Okay, the analytical school. They were the ones that promoted clarity, logic, analysis of language. You could probably read it, perhaps I don't need to speak at all. And perhaps I'll talk fast because this will be familiar to you. Okay, so that is what is the predominant attitude in the United States and Australia, the English-speaking world. There are other schools about, and I'm not even talking about the Asian world, but that is the analytical school, and that's still very current. So we have at the bottom here, Bertrand Russell and Gottlob Frege, and that's Lyotard, I think, my memory, yeah. And the pendulum is swinging, and this man came on the scene, Ludwig Wittgenstein. My God, was he a bombshell, as you'll see. He was very unsettling. I've done a separate presentation on this man, and I'm happy to do that again at some stage. But anyway, the point about him was he took the thinking of Russell and in particular Frege and turned it against itself. At first, excuse me. At first, Bertrand thought Wittgenstein was going to take over from him because he had all the right credentials, and but then at the end, within a short time, he found himself saying, "Look, this man, Russell, and Wittgenstein, who, by the way, trained in Manchester as an aeronautical engineer, so he had an engineering bent, but he was keen on philosophy, and he was very much a philosopher for the whole of his career." Fascinating guy. So he joined the ranks, but he rattled the ranks. And the best way you could look upon him, he became an anti-philosopher. Now, on the right, what happened shortly around that time, you have these people here at the postmodernist. And if you look at any of the postmodernists, like Camus here, like Foucault, Baudrillard, and mental block, I'm talking too fast, you'll find that they're very much picking up on the messages and the insights that Wittgenstein provided. It's got a poker in his hand because he had a feud with Karl Popper. And I can't remember what I left that in my series. So I got the Ouroboros here because, you know, he, as I said earlier, turned analytical philosophy against itself. And key points, he's often seen as a philosopher of language. And the important point to take from this, and I think I'm going to be talking about this, is that language is not quite as we are inclined to think of it. In other words, each word doesn't represent anything. The meaning of a word doesn't come from your Oxford dictionary. It comes from usage, being in conversation. and it is a tool, and that is the language of communication. And you can see he questioned, and using extreme logic, the underpinning of our understanding as language, and value judgment, and that shattered Bertrand Russell. As I said, I wish I had preceded this talk this evening by a talk about Wittgenstein, because some of the things I'm going to be talking about will make more sense. So, Wittgenstein, the engineer, he was very much against scientism. He felt that we were conditioned in ways of thinking, particularly from school, that we don't question. We move on through life without ever questioning. And that's why I support the Free Thinker Institute, because Garrett is encouraging everyone to reflect and think back. Anyway, you can read, he was very keen to keep philosophy and science apart. And he was very keen to promote that philosophy doesn't provide answers. Philosophy is to clarify, in his view. And he wanted philosophy to be unhindered by science. Very brave of him. Okay. The laws of physics. Very controversially, he felt that many of the laws of physics were really about human practice and language. And that's an interesting thought. Just in brackets here, let me just make a quick mention. If there's any scientific people amongst you, you know, Newton's law, one of them is F equals ma. It's a little formula. It describes what a force is. It describes how an item will accelerate. F equals ma, where m is mass, a is acceleration, and quantification. And he raised the point is that the laws of physics is actually describing our behavior in response to an event. It is describing our behavior in response to an event. It's one that I've sat with for quite a few years, and I'm increasingly warming to, and particularly when we come to the wave function and, you know, where the wave function is and the collapse of the wave function. Talks what, you know, these have some of these points, and I'm very mindful of the time, so I'm really going to have to pace it fast. And if I'm talking too fast, Garrett, jump in, please. Yeah. All right. So somebody's got their microphone on. I think it's Davud. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself. Okay. So physics is setting out a rule-governed practice. In other words, we are as humans very intent on trying to describe the what will happen. We are very much intent on just describing causality, and that drives us to the point of perhaps going over the top, as Wittgenstein reasons. And this little scene here, I just slipped that in, a little nonsense. It's out of a movie made about Wittgenstein, and here's Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein with his poker in his hand challenging Karl Popper. Karl Popper is a philosopher of science, was a philosopher of science, a very prominent one, and Wittgenstein didn't like his thesis. And by the way, and we will talk about it briefly, complementing Karl Popper is another philosopher, Paul Feyerabend, who lived in, he emigrated from Germany and was in California. And he was a postmodernist, and I'll mention that, and it's very relevant. Okay. Karl Popper, of course, is all about falsifying. You don't have a theory unless you can falsify it. If you cannot possibly falsify it or create a case for falsification, it is not a theory, it becomes a belief. And that was his thesis. And Wittgenstein was a little bit more liberal on that. Anyway, so talking about the postmodernists, what are they? Who are they? And I'm going to make a little bit of an attempt to describe them, but even that's going to be a bit clunky. The analytical school, very much focused on logic, with less regard to the context. And they have a strong synergy between the scientific and the philosophic inquiry. and they certainly champion universal truth, morality, and values. And that, that's how I was trained and how I was thinking. And then comes along Michel Foucault as a symbol of the postmodernists. And please, if I use him as a symbol, that's not to say that is necessarily exclusively the postmodernist thinking. It's just a symbol. And again, take note of the colors. Green is on the left and red is on the right, representing the two schools, that divide that I talked about. So the postmodernists, you can see, they are particularly strong, and take this away, this is a very important point, and we'll talk about this moment later, how thinking is influenced by power structures, that behind a lot of the assumptions, and that includes also religion, and I have to tread carefully here, is sort of driven by politics, and there is a cultural and social context, and that creates a rigidity. Anyway, I'm going to have to keep talking fast, and forgive me for going a little bit fast here. So the postmodernists, it is aimed to liberate philosophy. Remember what Wittgenstein was about. Very inclined to always question. I suppose you could call them supreme skeptics. And they're asking us all the time to question the narratives that we hold in our head that make so much sense. We've gone to college, university, and learnt all these things, and they're questioning all the time. And I would suggest with good cause. And I'd love to talk about this a bit more on another time. And how truths are constructed, and they're very much into deconstructing the fixed meanings and examine the influences of power. And also to promote multiple perspectives. Okay, Wittgenstein. And the shadows, I meant to say there, the shadow of Wittgenstein is everywhere. He's not so black and white, he's not so visible, but by golly, he's certainly very much alive and talking through the continental school and the postmodernist schools. So I just put this little symbol up, the ambiguity of where you look. If you stand on the left, you'll see a 6, and on the right, you'll see a 9. So again, this is repetition now, but skepticism, but a particular form of skepticism. Now, I'm introducing this. Some of you will say, well, what's that about? I'm repeating myself, and I think, cautioning against hubris, the underpinning. And I'm going to come back to that little triangle in a moment. And all the time, questioning the infallibility of the scientific method. And I'll come up with a couple of examples there. And Michel Foucault was saying that power and knowledge directly imply one another. They're sort of interrelated, and they're just words, but perhaps it might stick, and perhaps my subsequent slides might make that clear. I think I'm going to, because of the time, going to just move on. I've got this little boy peeking through what was to be a kaleidoscope, and what the postmodernists are inclined to do is to see what I call a soup, and so it's the world. It's like the debate that happened. It started like in the Ukraine and perhaps in the Gaza Strip, and the complexity of it. Each of those, these words that I'm uttering probably may not make much sense. I'm just trying to introduce the complexity of the world, and we don't like it. So where does science fit in? Well, Isaac Newton, he evolved the empirical method. I won't say necessarily that he became a scientist. It took perhaps Auguste Comte and the Vienna Circle to really separate science from philosophy. And remember, the highest award in science is a doctorate of philosophy, to affirm what I'm saying about how science evolved from philosophy. This man is Paul Feyerabend. Now, Paul Feyerabend was a philosopher of science of equal standing to Karl Popper. Oddly, not as well known. As I mentioned earlier, he was a German that emigrated to California. And he defined science in a much looser way. Again, being very mindful of the time, and I'm very sorry I'm rushing, but I know that Garrett has got a time restraint, so you have to read it, and if there's a recording, you'll be able to pause the recording and see some of the words that I'm using. And I'm going to illustrate what he is saying, and so you can skip the words because I'm going to introduce something quite controversial. This is an event that happened nearly 4 centuries ago. And until a few years ago, I was very aghast at what happened at that time. Because what happened, this man here, as the Pope at the time, put Galileo, a great scientist, under house arrest. Why? Because Galileo, using his telescope, affirmed what Copernicus said. And Copernicus said that, or showed that the Earth was not at the center of the solar system, it was the sun. Now that didn't fit the view of the church, and these two were friends. And the Pope said, look, I will be kind to you. I mean, you could be put at the stake around that time. It was a little bit post-Reformation, so there was a little bit of leniency. But he said, I'm going to put you under house arrest, and you are to keep your mouth zippered. Now, what Paul Feyerabend reasoned. Now, this is very confronting. When I first read about it, I thought, oh, come on, really? He said the church was more methodically sound and empirical than Galileo. What? From the Pope's angle, this is the time, a century after the Reformation. The 30-year war was still raging around that time, which was a religious war. And from the Pope's point of view, society's glue was under challenge at that time by this thinking. And Paul Feyerabend, a philosopher of science, said, that the Pope was more irrational in a way, and that Galileo had insufficient evidence, and that the faith of millions was at stake. Now, the important point is here. And this is my lesson when I began to reflect on what Paul Feyerabend. We value rationality. We value truth. Our society has moved on from 4 centuries. The glue, the adhesive, is today different to what it was 4 centuries ago. It is an invitation, this is why I introduced it, is an invitation to step back, take your glasses off, and feel the world at that time. So my view was the Pope was a rat bag, as I used to think, and I think I was influenced by Paul Feyerabend to say, look, it was already a very tenuous time in society, and Galileo had a right to be quiet, to be under house arrest. I'm sorry. So I've already said some of the things. Wittgenstein. I'm going to briefly introduce this man, Heinrich Hertz. And Heinrich Hertz, we've all heard about indirectly, perhaps, because if you connect to the mains voltage, you will experience 50 Hertz, 50 cycles per second. And Hertz said, and what he said inspired also Einstein, in particular Einstein. He said, don't worry about how it works, just focus on the play of the game. In other words, don't worry about the nature of what a force is. I mean, Einstein had to deal with his thesis and created space-time. And Hertz said, don't worry about what, for Einstein, don't worry about what it is, just develop your theory. And today we're very comfortable with relativity theory, still on the premise of what the hell is space-time anyway. Look, you can define it. You can define it as, you know, in terms of energy, whatever. But anyhow, and Paul Feyerabend argued that science is a human activity, and as a little bit of a counter. Whereas Wittgenstein, well, not whereas, it's complementing it. Wittgenstein said it's a language game with its own rules. Now, the language game has a very specific meaning. It is what, when you're holding a conversation, it's a language game. And it has its own reality. And in Wittgenstein's terms, a Lebensform, a life form. It's all there is. Now, again, that may not make much sense without having introduced Wittgenstein. And, you know, if you ever want a presentation on him, I'm happy to do it because it will make more sense. So what then is truth? Hey, this is a fundamental question, isn't it? So the analytical school is very much about objective truth, and that they exist independently. Now, I think today with quantum mechanics and even with relativity theory, you have to ask yourself, is that possible in today's understanding to hold an objective truth? You can make the case. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying the initial thinking with a defined objective truth is challenged. And here I'm introducing something here, and just look at these words here. Again, I'm using Michel Foucault as a symbol of the postmodernist thinking. Apophatic. It's a word you may not. I had to familiarize myself. It's a Greek word meaning not this, not that. It's often associated with religion. It's how to define God, and it's defining God on the basis of it's not this and it's not that. Or it's also the word neti, which is an ancient Sanskrit term. Not this, not that. And that is really what I'm going to lead to what postmodernist thinking is about. Because we don't like this, because you are not able to specifically talk about it. Somebody's going to say, well, thanks very much for your talk, Remke, but I'm still confused about what postmodernism is about. Well, I'm sorry, many of you, and I also had difficulty initially getting my head around it. Stay with this for a moment. An important point. The postmodernists and also the continental school, and postmodernists is actually an offshoot and they overlap. There's no black and white distinction between the two schools. Each of us have a unique perspective and understanding of the world, and that is okay. And if you think about relativity theory, general relativity theory, as Einstein defined it, doesn't privilege any observer over another. We are all in a particular frame of reference. And I heard Leonard Susskind, a theoretical physicist, say the same thing. And that's quite important. We all have a unique view of the world. Oh, ouch. And it's, you know, again, influenced by our backgrounds and our conditioning. And that offers an insight into the human condition, what we're conditioned with. Now, I'm going to just do a quick sciencey introduction here. I think a lot of you will be familiar with this. This is the diagram of the eye. And over here, we have the rods and the cones. And we have the cones, the RGB, red, green, blue, and the rods for black and white vision. And we know all about the science. And I'm not going to go and do a sciencey introduction here, but this is how we understand color. We understand color in terms of frequencies, break down the electromagnetic spectrum. And these cones and rods are sensitive to a particular part of that spectrum. That is what we grew up with. That's what I grew up with, and many of you are comfortable with. And this is where Newton exposed that white light could be broken up into its constituent frequencies, and that's why he's holding a prism. Now, do you remember this meme? I think it must be close to 10 years ago, and it was a meme that was promoted widely on the internet. And the question is, what color is the dress? Now, I personally see brown and blue, and about 30% of us will see that. But in reality, the majority said white and gold. They've done some studies since then, and they found that people that are disposed to getting up early in the morning will see, I think it's the blue and the black-brown predominance, and those that are night owls will see it more in that way. What I'm pointing to is the subjectivity, or a hint at least, if you can rationalize it in your head. It's a hint of the subjectivity that we sometimes ignore. The realist, the majority of us probably, versus the instrumentalists. They still struggle in science. And I'm going to give another little quick talk here. How we're doing for time, goodness. In quantum mechanics, there remains an enigma. And the enigma was attempted to be resolved by Niels Bohr, and he launched a Copenhagen interpretation. And what this is, yeah, look, even if I had to stop this presentation at this point, it's worth just highlighting this. If you have a light source and you have a detector, you will have on the screen a shadow of the two openings here, and you'll have the two light spots. If you have a detector, if you do not have a detector, or if you do not have a human attempting to obtain knowledge, you will have this result, which is an interference pattern. Now, this deserves more explanation, but the point is, it's a grand enigma. It is an enormous enigma underpinning quantum mechanics. The quantum mechanics is the most beautiful, most accurate, nothing that has been predicted in quantum mechanics has not been ultimately eventuated, including the Higgs boson. But, at the core of it, at the very essence of quantum mechanics is this enigma. There are two schools predominant schools. You even have the multiverse nonsense. You have the Copenhagen interpretation with Niels Bohr, and he said, "Shut up, don't worry about it. You ask a question of the universe or of nature, and nature will provide an answer." And then you have the other school, headed by David Bohm, who said, well, let's call it a pilot wave. Some of you may understand what I'm saying, doesn't matter. I just want to leave you with the thought that at the heart of the most beautiful, fundamental aspect of quantum mechanics, it sits an enigma. And so that's why I have the peekaboo symbol, the child, because it is a peekaboo. Depending if you peek, you'll get the two beams of light with on the detector here, and if you don't look, you'll get an interference pattern as if it is a wave. So it's like a particle when you're looking, and it is a wave when you're not looking. Peekaboo. So there are people like Carlo Rovelli, who's a quantum physicist, and he is saying, and it wrote, as I've written here, it is better not to consider a particle as an entity, but as an event. Objects are its nodes. And actually, when you look at relativity theory, I mean, there are no masses, physical masses in Einstein's general relativity theory. They are kinks and folds in space-time. Anyway, I'm not going to do a talk on that. Jean Baudrillard, our understanding of and he's a postmodernist thinking, it's all about our interpretation, perceptions, and language. Fluff stuff, woo. There are some interesting people that have argued, like these people. John Wheeler, by the way, supervised more PhDs in physics than any other professor of physics in the United States, and he ended up talking woo. That is, he talks about a participative universe. Henry Stepp David Bohm and Roger Penrose. Roger Penrose doing some interesting work at the moment. I'm not endorsing them. I'm just saying, look, just be open to the alternative realities and the alternative to your conditioning. I'm going to just briefly introduce Krishnamurti. Now, some of you may not have heard of him. He's an Indian, and you might argue, who the hell, why is Remco introducing J.D. Krishnamurti? Why? Well, for starters, David Bohm, who's a protege of Albert Einstein, spent years talking with him, and if you Google the two names, you'll find lots of videos or recordings of their conversations. A protege of Einstein talking with J.D. Krishnamurti. Why? With the theme of this is not a parrot. What do I mean by that? Well, J.D. Krishnamurti, whoops, right, I'm still there, said this. Hold on to this. Can you read this? The day you teach the child the name of a bird, the child will never see that bird again. What you see is the label. And the labels are very important. You can't have a conversation about labels, but just be aware that the labels will blind you from seeing the detail of the bird, and you will see a parrot. This is a very famous painting by the Belgian artist Magritte. And Bertrand Russell wouldn't agree, but I've just introduced him there because he was holding a pipe. And, you know, he's saying, well, this is not a pipe because we see the pipe and we don't see the detail. Critical observation of the postmodernists, they make a distinction between the object and its representation. We tend to confuse the map for the reality. And when you listen to some of the political debates, listen to how the map has become more dominant than the reality. Again, worthy of a topic to talk about. Language underpins our understanding of our world. We need to get that. This is Wittgenstein and this is Jacques Derrida speaking. It shapes our reality, and we have to be mindful of that. It's very hard to stand aside from it. It's just creating that awareness. Our preference to the binary, the opposites. You know, for example, walk into the street and say, "What's the opposite of love?" And I would say almost everybody would say, "Oh, hate." Well, there is another way, and I'm personally quite inclined to say there is no such thing as love, and there's no such thing as happiness. These are just words. It's very hard not to have a conversation. You could say it's a natural state. Again, I'm fueling some discussion. Question me afterwards on that if you like. Difference, you misspelled it purposely. How it's how it's used. Anyway, look, I don't want to make a lecture on, and again, I'm pacing myself against the time, and I'm trying to avoid Garrett leaning on me in a moment, saying, "Look, time's up, Rem." Okay. So I'm going to have to just skip this one. The key differences between the two. I'll just, for a moment, just stay silent, take out what you like. A lot of it's already been said. By the way, just on this little point here, the postmodernists reason that if you read a book, the reader has primary right to make the interpretation, not the author, whereas the analytical school will assign it to the author, just as one example of their different views. Okay, sorry, I have to move on. There are the big three schools. Again, I'm doing a quick breakthrough. A lot of it's already been said, so I'm sorry, you'll just have to watch the video and pause it and to see the words there. And the continental school and the postmodernists, and they straddle, and that's the important point. They overlap more with the continental school, but anyway. All right. Okay, so I'm down to, I've got 9 more slides. Garrett, please give me the time just to run through those 9, because the last couple of slides sum it all up. So each have appeal.